Welcome into episode 312 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian D. Felice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Bridget and Scott, you were at the game last night, a thrilling 2-1 overtime victory, series clinching win for the Boston Bruins over the Toronto Maple Leafs. There was no shortage of storylines, drama heading into the game.
So much drama.
The game delivered with a ton of theater. Scott, how many things of popcorn did you go through with the overtime session included?
Just one. Here's the thing:
he was nervous. Can I stop you right now?
I almost never refill.
No, and I'm going to stop you right now. Scott was in a weird mood, awful mood, right? Since Game 5, the loss in overtime, he has completely thought the Bruins were done. And so I was doing my normal.
Since before Game 5, Bridget, when they were up 3-1, I felt bad.
Okay, well, but once they lost and then we knew it was going back to Toronto, you definitely were feeling bad. So my normal antics, he kind of he doesn't put up with them, but he gives me like a little smirk, but normally just a little bit. Yesterday I was bothering him and he wasn't cracking and I was concerned. Not even a little bit. I was singing to him, nothing. He pretended he was listening to stuff in his headphones, which I knew he only had one ear in and he could hear me still. I was concerned. I was like, and you want to know what that does? It makes me try harder and it makes me more annoying. So Scott, just know that I'm never going to stop.
Well, the
more I will attack you.
What do you think I'm going to do now that you've clearly made note of this? You brought this up on Sunday Skate. You've now brought it up here. You brought it up off air. So I feel like this is bothering you way more than it's bothering me.
No. I want you to know that I don't give up on bothering you. And this is all just like a prolonged effect of you ignoring me.
Switch you to a different seat again.
He did. I think he switched me to a different seat in Game 5.
All right. Well, I don't know where the tensions were higher, on the ice last night or in the booth on the 9th floor. But Scott, to what you said a minute ago, a lot of individuals were uneasy, certainly with how,
including Scott,
with how the series unfolded between games 5 and to overtime in Game 7. Because, well, also Scott, you and I, we picked Bruins in 7, so just tip of the cap to us. We did predict the series correctly, though we didn't feel as comfortable throughout the series. And guys, that's because we don't have to get into the litany of historic failures and scar tissue Bruins fans have. But quite frankly, what it comes down to is last night, the Bruins had to prove it to their fans and to themselves, but to everybody, that they were capable of showing up and coming through last night. And that's why we're uneasy. They had to prove it to us. And it wasn't easy and it wasn't pretty. And the Maple Leafs go up a goal with just under 10 minutes to go in the game, first goal of the game. And I was absolutely shocked when the Bruins tied it. Kind of a weak goal by Samsonov to give up, but the Bruins tied it, and that showed great resolve. And then overtime, obviously, David Pastrnak comes through, and this is my opening shift, which is David Pastrnak answering the bell, right? Jim Montgomery called him out after Game 6. Pasta needs to step up. Quite simply put, guys, David Pastrnak stepped up with a series-winning overtime goal, as clutch gets, right, in round 1. And a lot of people are saying, is that a legacy game for David Pastrnak? I think legacy game could be strong, but it's certainly a huge moment for him personally and for the team. If the game goes the other way, then the criticism is through the roof, right? So when he comes through in that moment, that's huge. That's what moments are made of, right? Playoff moments. That's what makes guys' careers. So he stepped up.
At the very least, it goes on his career highlight reel. Now, every time there's a David Pastrnak highlight package, many, many years from now when he retires, when he's back and they're celebrating him, that goes on there.
Yeah, and it's going to have Judd's call in the background. Did anyone ask for some pasta? Did you hear that call? Was anyone asking for pasta? And, that's obviously preconceived because of the narrative going in, which there's a good reason. he was quiet. So I think I'm pretty sure Judd Surratt had thought about, okay, if Pasta scores, I'm going to say this. And of course, he scores the overtime game winner. And yeah, if this is a cup run like this, if this ends in like 2011, that is absolutely one of the key like punches in the storyline. Like you punched your ticket to the second round because Pasta was struggling. Montgomery called him out. It kind of makes Montgomery look like a genius in if you're telling it like in a very theatrical kind of narrative storytelling way. Montgomery calls him out, and then he scores in overtime, and this is the beginning of the Bruins getting the monkey off their back from last season, and now they're on to the second round. And you could see that was honestly that was a picture perfect ending for the Bruins for round one. And it sets up this next narrative for the next round. Okay, because look what we're coming into. We're trying to knock off the people who knocked us out of the playoffs last year, right? So the storylines continue to go, and Pasternak getting the overtime game winner and getting rid of the choking narrative, putting that to bed at least for now. Choking in the first round, all the talk about Jim Montgomery maybe getting fired for losing twice in the first round in his first 2 seasons, that's gone and that's behind them. And it makes for this epic buildup, maybe towards something bigger, maybe towards a longer cup run. And we all know Florida's going to be a really tough task, but in terms of, I mean, we're storytellers, right? Like at the end of the day, that's what Scott does. That's what I do. Like it all sounds great. Everything's easier when it plays out in that kind of way. And for Pasta, it did. And I'll get into mine now because Brian, unless you had more to say about Pasta, because mine's kind of taking what you did and this emotional boost you get from getting all of that behind you, getting the first series behind you, you're out of it. You almost can just breathe that the choking in the first round after being up 3-1 is not going to affect you the rest of the way, right? Like this is already better than you did last year. And a few of the things that were sticking with me throughout the day is just the confidence that you get from that. Think about it. A lot of these guys, it's their first ever Game 7 win. Because a lot of these guys have been knocked out in the first round the last few seasons. A lot of the younger guys have never even played in a Game 7. So Jeremy Swayman, this is his first ever Game 7 win. A lot of the younger guys, like, I mean, there's the older guys, Maroon, Marchand, Shattenkirk, Van Riemsdyk. Those guys have all been through it before. But for most of the team, this is experience they never had before. And from that point, you can just take it in and know that in another situation, maybe in the next round where you need to dig deeper, you can tell yourself we already did it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they certainly, like the reason I felt down and the reason a lot of fans felt down is because how could you manufacture confidence when you entered Saturday night 0-6 in your last 6 closeout games, 2-5 in your last 5 home games? I mean, in your last 7 home games in the playoffs. Like, I think anyone who claims they were confident, like any Bruins fan or anyone in Boston media who claims they were confident going to Game 7, liar. Like, there's just no way. You might have felt.
I know I can call BS on that because we ran a poll and 30% of people thought that they were going to win and 70% of people thought they were going to lose. So the confidence we know was not that high.
95% of that 30% was lying. That was fake confidence on the internet.
Yeah. Well, Razor couldn't even watch after Toronto scored. He got in the elevator because he wanted to change floors. He needed to be in a new location. It's definitely a superstition thing. So he needed to move locations. He was trying to change it all because he had a really bad feeling. And then before he even got out of the elevator, Lindholm scored to tie it. So yeah, a lot of people were feeling super nervous before the game, and then especially when Toronto scored with Nylander's goal.
Yeah. Anyways, so my opening shift is looking ahead to a rematch with the Florida Panthers. the team that ruined your season of destiny last year, came back on you, won 2 overtime games in your building in games 5 and 7. A team that I believe is better than that Panthers team last year. I think they got deeper both up front and on the blue line. Acquiring on defense, Nico Mikkola and Oliver Ekman-Larsson in the offseason, who have both played really well. Ekman-Larsson has looked completely rejuvenated this season. Up front, most of the season was pretty much the same lineup that they had last year. Then you add Vladimir Tarasenko at the trade deadline. He's been a good fit there. So this is a strong team. They are the favorites. The tables are flipped a bit. The Bruins, despite only being separated by 1 point at the end of the season, I think the Bruins are a pretty clear underdog. They don't have as much high-end talent up front. I don't think they're as deep up front. Last year, we thought the Bruins defense was the biggest strength over Florida. We thought Florida's blue line was a big question mark. This year, I would probably take Florida's blue line. The one area where you need to have an advantage is in goal. And obviously, that was an advantage for the Bruins in the first round. Jeremy Swayman is playing better than any other goalie in the playoffs right now. But the Panthers have Sergei Bobrovsky, who's a Vezina Trophy finalist this season. Not a pushover. Can be prone to inconsistency. So if you can catch him on a little bit of a downswing, that would be nice. But I think, a very exciting series because obviously there's a lot of players on this Bruins team who are looking for revenge. That wound is still very fresh from last year. As much as, the Bruins in round 1 said, you learn from the past, but you don't really want to dwell on it. And that was in the context of potentially blowing another 3-1 lead. Well, now you're literally facing the team that did that to you. So there's really no hiding from that history. You can say you're not focused on last year or whatever, and that's fine. You shouldn't be focused on it, but you can't ignore it. Like, you can't. There's no way to really dodge that. Like, it's there, and it's there until you can get past this team.
Yeah, so heading into the round 2, the Bruins, as you said, Scott, they're definitely the underdogs against Florida, which is interesting because the Bruins were 4-0 against the Panthers in the regular season this year and were the Atlantic Division leaders for the majority of the season, over 95% of the year. And in fact, they lost the division to the Panthers in pretty much game 82. So now I just want to say quickly, the regular season, in my opinion, the regular season record versus Florida means nothing to me. Okay. It means nothing to me. I'm not sitting here saying they were 4-0 against the Panthers, so the Bruins are the favorites. That, in fact, it's kind of the opposite of what I'm saying. It's interesting when you have a team that was undefeated against somebody in the regular season and just lost the division on the last day that they're such a severe underdog. And it is because Florida is such a formidable opponent. They have such a complete roster and they play the right way. So I do like the way the Bruins competed against the Panthers over those 4 games. I think that there's a lot of emotion that comes when these two teams play. So for that, I think you can learn that the Bruins rose to the occasion when they played. But as far as the record, I don't care. But before we get into that Panthers series, guys, because there's a lot to get into, we do need to take a step back and just kind of recalibrate what we just witnessed, right? And so going into last night, you have the Toronto Maple Leafs, who had lost, I think, 6 consecutive Game 7s dating back to maybe 2013 against the Bruins. I don't really recall, but just a complete tortured franchise. Well,
wasn't it like they haven't beat the Bruins in the playoffs since the 60s?
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot. There's so many stats that have been flying around the last week or so. It's kind of hard to keep track of all of them. But yes, that was one of them.
They were also in different conferences for a long part of that. But
yeah.
So the year 2004, the year 2004 stuck out in my mind for these two teams going into Game 7 last night for a couple of reasons. For the Toronto side of things, since the year 2004, they have won 2 playoff series, 2004 and then last year against Tampa Bay. For the Bruins since 2004, last night marked the 6th time in 20 years that the Bruins were playing a Game 7 in Boston after having at least a 3-1 series lead. That's the 6th blown 3-1 series the Bruins have had since 2004. 0-4 against Montreal, 10 against Philly, 13 Toronto, 18 Toronto, 23 Florida, 24 Toronto. Now the
Wait,
updated
04 was Razor, right?
Yes, it was. Now the updated record in those games after last night is 3-3. But this is why going into last night, it was okay. One fan base is about to be completely tortured even more so. But of course, the Bruins find a way to win the game. And so what did you guys make of that game last night? They say the old adage is that over the course of 7 games, the better team usually wins the series. Did you guys feel that for the majority of the 7 games, the Bruins were the better team? Because I felt as though it was pretty split, and it really did just come down to one team had a goaltender who was the best player in the series, and that was it for me. I mean, yes, there's special teams and little things like that, but for me, Jeremy Swayman was a story.
Yeah, I think the Bruins were better overall, as you said, because they had the best player in the series in Jeremy Swayman. They were much better on special teams. Toronto only scored 1 power play goal the entire series. Like, that's insane. And 5-on-5, in the end, wound up being fairly even. I think Toronto scored 1 more 5-on-5 goal in the series. So, like, that whole recipe, it feels like that really favors the Bruins, right? You had the best goalie, you had the best special teams, and you more or less broke even 5-on-5. So, like, how did it go 7? But obviously we know it's because, Toronto really changed the way they played it in 5, 6, and 7 and packed it in and became a much more defensive team. And the ice just got so congested that you ended up in a situation where it was just like 1 mistake, 1 bounce, 1 goal. There's a reason that the last 3 games were all 2-1. Like that, it was almost, like if you watch some of the other series, and I guess I'm thinking specifically of like Colorado, Winnipeg, or maybe Edmonton, LA, where this was almost like a different sport. Like it was just so much more defensive. It was so much tighter checking, whereas those series were, a lot more wide open, like space, speed. And I tend to think that the way the Bruins and Leafs both wound up playing, I think tends to be more successful in the long run, in the postseason. But it makes for a lot more nerves, because that other way, if you're more talented, you can kind of just overpower teams. This style, this is what you end up with. A lot of 1-goal games, a lot of 2-1. And it's really nervy. It's really nerve-wracking for fans and probably for players as well, because
and for Scott,
you don't want to be that one. Like, all it takes is that 1 mistake. It could have been Brandon Carlo last night. Like, if the Bruins don't get that, first off, a big save from Swayman on a 3-on-2 on Edmondson right after, and then that great shift from the third line and the Lindholm goal. Like, Brandon Carlo's the GOAT who made the big mistake. And, like, that's what you remember the series for, is Brandon Carlo fell down and gave away Game 7. Like, it's just, like, that's all it can take sometimes.
Yeah. No, and Swayman made more than just that save. Like, my brother, he's not a huge hockey fan, but he was watching it last night, and he texted me after Swayman made the save with like 1 second left in regulation. Because remember, the last 10 seconds, Wotherspoon tries to make a clear, and they can't get the puck out of their own end. And in the last 3 seconds, puck almost ends up in the Bruins' net, and Swayman makes another great stop, and then they go to overtime. And there are just so many situations like that you can think of with Swayman. But to the point about playing that tight style of game, when Razor called in, because Razor is traveling to Florida, so he's on Sunday Skate with us the whole time, but he was on for just 1 segment today. And one of the things he said that stuck with me was, I think that the way that Toronto played Boston and the way they figured out how to overcome it, bodes well for them against Florida, because that's exactly the kind of game that Florida plays. So you're about to go play a similar style that you just played in 5, 6, and 7. And they found a way to. I know they lost 2 of those 3 games, but maybe it sets them up better than if they were going to go like Scott's mentioning. There's some series that have been wide open. The Bruins are about to go play a very similar style that they've been playing to close out this series.
Yeah, and just keeping it to game 7. So again, for Bruins fans who outside of 2011 have just kind of seen the same old song and dance, oftentimes ending at TD Garden in heartbreak fashion, it's a 0-0 game just past the midway point of the third period, and you guys talked about it. Brandon Carlo just trips. I guess he forgot the ice was slippery, so there was really nobody around him.
This is the second time this year that he fell like randomly out of nowhere and it led to a goal. And last time, coach literally said, "Ice is slippery." That was his comment in the post game. Was ice is slippery. And it's happened twice. And I don't mean that in like a way to throw it on Carlo at all, because I think he's had a great series.
Well, we'll throw that one on him because that was.
Well, no, I mean like not to like make that the defining Carlo moment, because he's had a great series.
Yes, but fair. But in that moment, that's an egregious mistake. And had it not been for Samsonov kind of letting one by him that he shouldn't have, that probably stands. But that when that goal happens the way that it does, Austin Matthews figuring in on it after returning to the lineup, as a Bruins fan, you're watching the game, you're waiting for something bad to happen, and you see Carlo fumble the puck and trip over himself, and then they score the way they did. You're like, and at that point, the Bruins still haven't scored a goal, and the Bruins haven't scored goals at all really in the last couple of games, except for 0.01 seconds left. So you're sitting there and you're saying to yourself, "Oh God, like here we go." And then the Lindholm goal happens, and Scott mentioned the third line. I thought that the third line was by large their best line all night, and heading into overtime. If the Bruins found a way to lose that game in overtime, I think that Jeremy Swayman, Mason Lohrei, and the third line all held their end of the bargain, and in Swayman's case, and then some. I thought the top 6, and I thought a lot of their top defensemen, would have looked back at that game with some regrets. And obviously Lindholm tied the game and had a phenomenal pass to Pasternak, but I'm more so talking about Charlie McAvoy and others. So that third line, guys, that was a spark plug that the team needed all night, because while David Pasternak is the hero, outside of just barely missing the post on a one-timer at the end of the game, he was by and large held in check too by Toronto. And so he's a game breaker. He doesn't need much, but that third line, man, they had stability, and they brought the jam for the Bruins all night, and ultimately led to the game-tying goal.
Yeah, and Justin Brazeau in particular had the most shot attempts of any player in the game. According to Natural Stat Trick, the most scoring chances of any player in the game, and the most high danger chances. And one of those came right before that goal where, I don't know if he has a kind of a whack at it right in front. And I think it caught someone else's stick too, but ends up, just right on top of the net, just over the crossbar, and then kind of bounces down and ends up back at Lindholm and goal. But yeah, that line was great. And like, I think I actually thought, look, I think you always want more from your top 6 when they don't break through until Pasternak's overtime winner. I actually thought the Zacha, Geeky, Pasternak line had some really encouraging shifts. Like I liked the way that looked. Like I think it gave the Bruins something to build off in terms of just trying to figure out how you line your team up in this next round, because we saw Heinen start the series up there. Then you see DeBrusk go there, and then you see Zacha split up from Pasternak, and it's geeky between Pasternak and Marchand. Like, you saw just a bunch of different combinations. I kind of feel like you maybe found something you can settle on for a little bit with Geeky in the middle there. Listen, Morgan Geeky is not really a top 6 center, but he does seem to have some chemistry with Pasternak. And Pavel Zacha, quite frankly, just didn't play well enough up the middle in this series. So if you put him on wing and that, gives you he gives you a little bit more there, then great. Then, keep him there this series. Now I'm sure some of how they line up is going to be matchup based, and the coaches are probably going over all that on Sunday. But I did feel like this was a lineup that you could feel pretty good about it. And for the third line to be that good without Morgan Geekie centering it, because he's been your third line center most of the year, that was pretty encouraging. Like I mentioned Brazeau, but Frederick at center, Van Riemsdyk stepping up and having a strong game. Guy, I think we had entertained the idea of one or maybe even both of those guys, Van Riemsdyk and Brazeau, coming out of the lineup, right? Like we had mentioned, what do you do if Heinen returns? Do you try to get Lauko in for more speed? And those guys justified Montgomery keeping them in.
Yeah, I think that I just want to say this because we're, kind of recapping this series with Toronto before heading forward. Frederick had a great series. Frederick has played some of his best hockey in this series. And we knew, and he's a natural center. So he came in knowing this season that Bergeron and Krejci left, that he could have to play more center. He actually told us that he was looking forward to the opportunity to play more center. And he did well with it last night. I also thought JVR once coming into the series has played well. Brazeau, healthy, driving offense. I liked his game. Third line overall, absolutely liked them. I've been on the record all year as saying that I like the way Geekie plays with Pasternak. And I think he has a smarts to his game that contribute to the dynamic of that line with Pasta, Zacha, and him. One thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about during Sunday's skate was Heinen. Like, we were getting asked questions about when's Pete coming back, but no one really asked us about Heinen and the update on him. And when he comes back, what do you do with the lineup? Do you keep Geekie there? Do you try to work Heinen back in somewhere in the bottom six? That's been an injury for the Bruins that people haven't talked about much, haven't asked about much, and we're not actually sure how long the designation is, Scott, right? Like, there's not been like a day-to-day, week-to-week designation for him.
I mean, he seems pretty close. He was on the ice for morning skate, and Montgomery didn't rule him out after morning skate. He said they had to talk to the doctors and trainers and see where he was at, versus with Peak, who was also on the ice for morning skate. Montgomery did rule him out. He said he's just not cleared. He's not an option for Game 7. So, I think it's safe to say Heinen's in a day-to-day situation. It seems like he's very close.
So I guess the next question would be, would you, if he's good for Game 1 or even Game 2, do you put him back with Pasta and Zacha? Because that combination wasn't working in the playoffs. It worked in the regular season. It wasn't working so well against Toronto. You try it again against Florida, it's a different team.
It's a different team, but they're heavy, and I think you do this. And quickly, I just want to applaud Jim Montgomery for not making multiple lineup changes heading into Game 7 after a couple of tough losses. Right? I think it not rocking the boat, I think, kind of help. Right? I mean, we're talking about that third line last night in Game 7 playing great. If Lauko's in there, maybe it changes things or whatnot. But in any event, moving along to what you said, Bridget, if you like, Coyle, Marchand, DeBrusk, that'll stay the same. If you're a fan of Geekie with Zacha and Pasternak, I think you got to keep that as it is right now. We talked about the third line being great. So for me, if Heinen's good to go for Game 1, I think the natural place would be to maybe sub him in for Johnny Beecher and play him with Maroon and Boquist. And, obviously you can move him up to the Pasternak line if you want to, or maybe you take out, I don't think you want to take out Maroon in this Florida series. So if you want to stick with the lines from Game 7 and Heinen's good to go, maybe that's the one natural place to make a switch and then go from there.
I think Maroon could be the X factor in the Florida series. Like, that's one of the last people I would take out.
Yeah, I honestly kind of, I don't know if you really even have to force Heinen back in. Uh, guys shouldn't really lose their spots to injury, but whether it was because of the injury or whatever, I mean, Heinen was having a very quiet series even before he started missing practice time. I kind of look at this lineup and I'm like, it just won you a game 7. Keep it together, see how it goes, and then you have Heinen as like a really good option if you get into game 2 or 3, and hey, we need a little more offense. We need someone with a little more, poise with the puck on a stick. Maybe better, smarter in battles, like whatever it is. Then maybe you bring him in, but you know, it's not like Danton Heinen's Brad Marchand. He's not a player. He's had a very good season. Obviously, I don't want to downplay him too much, but I don't know that he's a player that you have to make sure you get back in as soon as he's cleared. If you have a lineup that's rolling fairly well. Again, I'm not going to say it's the greatest lineup in the world because they scored 1 goal in regulation. So I don't want to act like this is the greatest 12-man lineup in history, but I just like the makeup of most of those lines.
Like you said, Geeky with Zacha and Pasta was not it was equally effective to the line when it was Heinen. Like, they didn't do much 5-on-5 either way. And the point I want to make about Heinen is that we see the Lindholm pass that sets up Pasta for the game-winning goal. Heinen has kind of been doing that throughout the season to Pasta. Like, he'll make a neutral zone pass. He'll make a 2-zone pass to Pasta for this random breakaway and stuff like that. So I think that is something he can bring to that line. I think Geeky does it well too. It depends on whether or not you trust Zacha to take the faceoffs. So I looked at the Geeky move as more of a, hey, let's take some pressure off Zacha. He's not going to have to take as much defensive responsibility if he's not centering. He's going to have time to clear his head. He's going to have time to think about his offense more than defense with that move. So that's how I looked at it. Brian, I can tell you maybe disagree, but
That's
what I hear from a lot of coaches, and I'm not taking this just from Bruin stuff. Like, when I've talked to PWHL Boston, move their top line center to wing because they wanted her to focus more on her own offense rather than some of the other responsibilities. Talk to college coaches about this all the time. If you're just a Bruins fan, you might not know that this is something that college teams do all the time. Other coaches do this a lot.
Sorry, my face wasn't in disagreement with what you were saying, Bridget. I was actually just trying to think back because I don't hate what you're saying with Geeky and Pasternak and Zacha. Like, I think Geeky plays a nice heavy style down low. I do think he's smart, like you're saying. I've been on record saying I think he makes decisions a little slow at times for some of the players he's with in the top 6, especially around the goal mount. But I was trying to think to myself, you say Geeky and Pasternak play well together with certain chemistry, and I'm not here to discredit that at all. I'm genuinely trying to think back. Like, I can't really recall many like Geeky to Pasternak goals or Pasternak to Geeky goals this year. Like, maybe 1 or 2, but like, can you guys recall?
Small sample size. It was a very small sample size because they weren't put together a lot. But there was a West Coast trip where they were put together and they found each other a lot. And it led to Pasta assisted on a Geeky goal and Geeky assisted on a nice Pasta goal. And then there was one play more recently, I think it was a half change, where Geeky, he was about to get off the ice. He's in the neutral zone. He sends like a 2-zone pass to Pasta for a goal. So it's a really small sample size, but they are on the same page when they are on the ice together. It's a much smaller sample size than with Zacha. There
was definitely one in Boston, down the way the Bruins shoot twice, where Pasternak found him in a slot on a rush play for a snapshot one time. Or I think it was maybe like sometime in March. But in any event, look, the whole Heinen thing. I don't disagree with what Scott's saying. I'm not saying to force him back in. I just think it comes down to like, if you have Heinen with with Maroon and Boquist on the fourth line. Now you have 4 lines where you can expect a couple players to maybe score a goal. Like if Heinen can score, Boquist can score, not at elite clips, but they can score. So obviously Beecher scored in the first game against Toronto, but I think that offensively that fourth line's limited. I guess that's the nature of a fourth line. So there's nothing crazy I'm trying to get Heinen into the lineup for. I'm just thinking if he's ready to go, that's probably the one spot where maybe I'd put him to not rock the boat of what just helped you win game 7.
Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to look up some numbers on Geeky and Pasternak, but think I'm gonna run out of time.
Yeah, and it's a small sample size, like I said.
Yeah, and they had a bunch of different wings, so it makes it a little harder. Like there was a stretch where it was Zach on the wing with them. There's a little bit with Heinen, DeBrusk, Van Riemsdyk, but overall, like they were definitely in the positives goal wise. A quick count here. I got like 9-6 maybe. Bruins up in goals when they were together at 5-on-5. So again, like that is a fairly small sample size, but it was a net positive.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, it's the playoffs. Things will change game to game, and we know that they can play together. I was just curious. Like, I was genuinely trying to think of like any goals where they're like feeding each other, but I'm sure there's a few. One last note. I should say one last note, but game 7 as well. Before we really dive into Florida, Mason Lohrei. I mean, talk about a player who, Jeremy Swayman was the best player in the series by far, and it's ironic because so much of the conversation going into the series was the Bruins need to ride the 2 goalies, and well, turns out Swayman was, fantastic and was playing just okay, not having his partner give him rest half the time. So we know that. Granted, a full playoff season is different, but at least for one series, he seemed okay to carry the load on a tough schedule. But Mason Lohrei, guys, like. I don't believe he started the series in the lineup. I think Matt Grzelcyk did. So
Yeah, it was Grzelcyk, yeah.
I mean, here he is in game 6. He was great. Game 7, I think he was their best. He may have been their best defenseman from start to finish.
Yeah, I'd probably put Lindholm ahead of him, but he was absolutely up there. I thought he definitely was awesome in game 7, and you saw him like taking control with the puck on his stick in transition. And looking smooth, looking confident, which is something you can't say for every Bruins defenseman in this series. And again, Lohrei had his bumps like the first game he got in, but for the most part, since then, it's really been solid. And I think you've seen him get better as the series went on, which is so encouraging for, a first-year player to have that kind of growth and, just a handful of games in his playoff career. But yeah, he was making things happen. He was a driving force, and he was one of, we talk about like how tight checking these games were and how little space there was. He was one of the guys who was creating space, and he was doing it just by gaining some separation, by driving up the middle of the ice, and then finding teammates, opening up space for them by getting involved in the rush.
Yeah, great shielding the puck too. Like, so Grzelcyk was in the first 2 games. Lohrei goes in game 3, doesn't come out of the lineup. Montgomery told us after game 7, he thought that he had, of the 5 games that he played, he thought he had 3 really solid games and one that he didn't like and one that he was medium, like he's okay with. But he thought that both of the times that he didn't have perfect games, that he grew and learned off of those and became a better player. And you saw that really come out in game 7 because we talked about, and Razor disagreed with us. I think most of the commentary I've heard didn't think that was a great game by McAvoy, but it seemed like Lohrei was potentially the better defender. Just in that game, I'm not saying overall, because that's crazy. In that game, Lohrei was maybe making passes and transitioning better than McAvoy, not losing pucks. He was just solid, confident, calm, clearly learned from the mistakes he made earlier in the series. And that's what's great about getting him in, is he's able to take it all in. And now next year, think about how confident you could be in him next year, or in future series this year, knowing what you have now. And I said this on Sunday Skate, and I'm not a Grzelcyk hater. I never have been. But I am totally fine with the D pairs that were in Game 7 and not seeing Grzelcyk again in the playoffs, just because and that has to do with Lohrei playing as well as he has coming in for Grzelcyk, Shattenkirk's leadership ability, Wotherspoon being a shutdown defenseman. I'm even okay with seeing Forbert, just if that's what it calls for. If you need a good penalty killer, you need somebody to block shots. Pete comes back. Grzelcyk is the last guy of all those people I just mentioned that I want to see in the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Grzelcyk hater either. I've always seen Lohrei's ceiling, and I don't think his floor was as low as people said it was as a rookie. So, but yeah, I mean, if Lohrei or Shattenkirk goes down ever, and you need an extra person that can transport the puck, then maybe. But to your point, Bridget, I think you're right on the money. Now, as far as McAvoy goes, we have to talk about him because Scott mentions how he might give the advantage to the Panthers this year on the blue line. Well, Charlie McAvoy is not Charlie McAvoy. There is no world where the Bruins have a defensive advantage in the blue line. I think it might be unfair to say, because there's a lot of plays over the course of 60 plus minutes, especially when you're a top pair defenseman going against the other team's best. So it's probably a little unfair for me to say the Bruins won Game 7 in spite of Charlie McAvoy, but he certainly was a liability on a handful of occasions and had mishandlings of pucks and poor decision-making with the puck that led to grade A scoring chances for the Maple Leafs that the Bruins were bailed out by Jeremy Swayman. If any of those go in, who knows how the game ends. So to say Charlie McAvoy needs to be a hell of a lot better is an understatement. And what did you guys think of his Game 7 and his first round series as a whole? Do you think that we may have overestimated his offensive abilities on the blue line based on his trajectory as a younger player and just what we think is his natural skill level? Is it a confidence issue? So what do you where are you guys with McAvoy right now heading into this Panthers series? Because they need him to be vintage McAvoy and they need him to go forward instead of going backwards, which it looks like he's doing at the moment.
Yeah, it feels like it's not, to me, like I don't think it's a skill thing or even an effort thing. It's like a confidence or just not seeing the ice the right way. Like, when you see pucks just jump over his stick or him whiff on a pass, it's like, how do you explain that? Like, is that nerves? Because we know Charlie McAvoy knows how to handle a puck. So, like, what do you chalk it up to when he whiffs on it twice in Game 7? We know Charlie McAvoy can. Now, listen, I don't think getting shots through has been like a super strength for him, but we know he can do it. So when he's holding onto a puck too long or has a shooting lane and passes out of it right into a Toronto stick, like, again, that's not like, oh, he doesn't have the skill to take the shot. That's like he's not confident enough or assertive enough to take it. And, like on that play in particular, where they're on the power play and he has a shot from like, high-ish slot, and he turns around and passes to Pasternak, who's like kind of like almost behind him, and it goes right to a Toronto stick. Like, it made me think of, Patriots fans will definitely remember this, but former Jets quarterback Sam Darnold on a Monday Night Football game was mic'd up, and ESPN did him dirty, quite frankly. They aired the audio of him saying, "I'm seeing ghosts." And I'm like, that's what it feels like with Charlie McAvoy right now to me. It's like, it's almost like he's seeing a block that like isn't there, or, is just like double clutching for some reason. And that's not even like, And that's honestly just game 7. Like then you can go back to, game 5 overtime. Him and Coyle, neither one of them pick up Nyes coming in. Game 6, a bad icing right before Toronto's first goal of the game, and then not fully getting into the lane for the shot block, and it deflects off them. Like, I don't know. It's hard to explain. Like, listen, I never expected Charlie McAvoy to be, Erik Karlsson or Cale Makar offensively. I think his offensive game has grown year to year. But right now, it's more just like an overall confidence thing to me, it seems.
Yeah, I don't think it's nerves. To me, it doesn't feel like nerves. So I guess confidence is probably the better area to kind of focus on. But it could be a teaching moment from Montgomery here too. There are ways to coach someone through that, to coach someone through hesitations and confidence issues. And especially when this is your alternate captain, he's wearing an A. He's got, him and Pasta, they're both wearing an A this season. That's why he called out Pasta after game 6. You needed him to step up. I don't know if he's going to publicly say anything about McAvoy, because I think McAvoy defensively has been doing things right, but then there's turnovers and there's other stuff, different parts of his game that he looks uncomfortable with. So maybe it's just like where Lohrei had his hiccups, and obviously Lohrei, it's more excusable because he's younger, but you look at the tape, you figure out, okay, maybe I just have to go in with a mindset to pull the trigger, not second guess it. Or, by the way, a guy like Kevin Shattenkirk doesn't defensively cover everything the way he should or whatever. He's a little bit older, but he's not someone, and the reason why he's good on the power play, he doesn't seem to overthink things. And it feels like that's where we are with McAvoy, just maybe a little bit of overthinking, trying to do too much. And when it just needs to be a little bit more simple. And that's how you have to play in the playoffs. So could be just a coaching moment. I don't think he's going to be like that the whole playoffs. I have confidence in him that we can see the upside of McAvoy, because I said this on Sunday Skate earlier today too. He's driving the net. Like, offensively, he's doing some really good things as a defender. It's up at the blue line that he's making some weird fumbles with the puck. It's neutral zone stuff. But he's going on goal. He's getting good quality chances when he drives the net. It's hard for me to criticize him. I know we all saw it the same way with the fumbles and the missed pass, like the decision to pass when he should have shot it. But I feel like it's correctable. I'm not overly concerned about it. If it keeps happening, yes. But I feel like this is a good moment. You're between series. You don't have a lot of time to transition, but this is the time to put it out there what you want him to do. If you're Jim Montgomery, try to help him make that correction in his mentality, really. Not even just like skill-wise. It's a mentality thing.
It is a mentality thing, and ultimately coaching's great, but the one thing that solves confidence is eventually finding the back of the net or contributing offensively. And then I think, hopefully that helps him. I think a change of scenery, a fresh start in a new series can help him too. So, Bridget and Scott, do you have any final thoughts on the Maple Leaf series before we switch gears to Florida with about 20 minutes to go in the show, probably?
No, I'm good with transitioning.
Yeah,
okay. All right. So moving ahead to Florida. Okay. I'll just set the stage quickly. Florida is going to be a very heavy betting favorite. We talked about it. Despite the Bruins' record against the Panthers in the regular season, and despite the fact that the Bruins were atop the Atlantic Division for the majority of the year, everybody on this panel here and everybody in the hockey world most likely is conceding to the fact and in agreement that the Panthers are the favorite in this series and should be. They should be the favorite. They have the more complete, talented roster on paper. They play a very heavy playoff style of hockey, heavy brand of hockey in your face. They work extremely hard. They're great defensively, offensively, and they took care of business against the Lightning in 5. So they've been resting and healing and gearing up for this series against the Leafs or the Bruins. And it turns out it was the Bruins. The Bruins will not have to deal with any sort of rust, right? That's the counter argument to having rest. Is they're going to be rust? The Bruins won't be rusty, or they shouldn't be rusty. They have the best goalie in the playoffs right now based on the first round. They have, motivation from last year to avenge their loss to the Panthers, and they are a good team, and they played Florida well. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us where I think it's going to be a pretty good series, an emotional series, a physical series. I do expect a longer series. We'll get to predictions at the end. But I'll just start off with this, guys. The Bruins got their asses kicked in round 1 in the faceoff circle. That's one area where it's not center versus center strictly, right? Most faceoffs aren't cleanly won. It's a team game. But Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha, if he gets back at the dot, or Geeky, whoever is at the center dot for the Bruins, that has to be an area of improvement, one would think, in this series against Florida.
Yeah, for sure. Look, the Bruins have been an average to below average face-off team all year, and Montgomery said something the other day that I'm actually glad he said, because it's true, but no one ever wants to talk about it. In the grand scheme of things, face-offs are fairly overrated. Like, there's not really a ton of correlation between great face-off team and great record, bad face-off team, bad record. Like, it's kind of all over the place. But obviously, situationally, it's important. And that's, like, with the Bruins, it's like, that's where it matters. Like, I don't care if you go 40, 45% on faceoffs. Can you win a key one on a power play or a penalty kill? Defensive zone late in a game, up by 1. Offensive zone late in a game, down by 1. Like, those are the big ones. You want to lose every neutral zone faceoff in between? Like, I don't really care. Possession in hockey, possession changes on average every 5 seconds. Like, so you lose a faceoff. Statistically, you're getting the puck back 5 seconds later. But it's those situations where, on a power play, it's going to be more than 5 seconds because you're going to have to chase it all the way back to your zone. So, they have to be better on faceoffs. It's one of the reasons I think, even though when he got back in the lineup, he was a little more iffy on faceoffs, but I think Beecher stays in the lineup just because I think you need another guy on faceoffs. But the problem is like, even with Beecher in, that they're still lacking that one go-to guy that, like, they trust for every big D zone draw. Like, obviously, for 20 years it was Patrice Bergeron, and you don't really expect to, like, find that guy the very next season to replace him. But at times it's been Zacha, at times it's been Coyle, even a little bit of Geeky. You've even seen Frederick get a couple of them now, Beecher for sure. And it's like, the reason you see all of them taking them is because Montgomery hasn't settled on one and isn't super confident in any one of them.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, it is absolutely a vote of confidence to put your rookie center in there to take those in key situations. But I feel like Coyle in the past had been someone that they had gone to as a go-to, like, oh, okay, say it's the last 30 seconds of a game, you're trying to hold on to a win, you need to just win the face-off, tie the puck up, whatever, get it out. It had been Coyle. But this series, it's been no one, honestly, in this series. Scott, I know some of those aren't important, but is there a number, a face-off percentage number, that it gets down below and you're like, oh yeah, that's problematic? Because to me, they're hanging out in some of these games below 40%. And to me, like 45, 55, that's not huge, but like you're in your 35, you're 37, like that's a bad number. Like that, and that means that you're losing not just neutral zone faceoffs, you're losing important faceoffs. It could be special teams faceoffs, it could be offense. That means you're losing them in every zone and on important situations.
Yeah, it's probably that. It's probably 40, which the Bruins were under in a couple games this series.
Yeah, and look, Scott, you mentioned it. There's face-offs and then there's situational face-offs where it's a killer to lose them, right? Yeah, if there's an offsides, neutral zone, whatever, it happens. But, if you're on the power play and you said you lose a face-off, that's a killer. If you are in the D zone and you lose a face-off, that could lead to, 40 seconds plus of offensive zone time for the opposition. You're defending. Whoever's out there, they're lucky to get it to the neutral zone and dump in and change their gas. So it does make a difference, and it doesn't make a difference because you mentioned that the possession changes so often. But if possession is changing in the defensive zone, it's like you're scrambling to get it out. So it's an issue. I don't anticipate it getting any better because they are who they are. They are who we thought they were. But on the topic of center or face-offs, another area where the Bruins need to improve against the Panthers if they want success, one would think, is that their top players, not named Marchand and Pasternak up front, they have to continue to help score. And DeBrusk ended the first round with 5 points in 7 games, so I'm not even talking about him. I'm talking about 2 guys that are tied with Pat Maroon and Brandon Carlo in first-round points, and that's your top 2 centers all year. Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha, each with 2 assists in round 1, no goals. Here's the problem. Not only it would be problematic if they were tied with Pat Maroon in points if they were playing the same amount of ice time. They're playing probably twice as much hockey as Pat Maroon over the course of a game, if not more. It's unacceptable going forward. They got by in round 1 by the skin of their teeth as a team, but Charlie Coyle and Pavel Zacha, look, they might not be Alex Barkov and Sam Reinhart, and we know the Bruins all year, they weren't able to get those high-end centers. Got it. I get it. I'm not even saying I expect them to perform or outperform Florida's top 2 centers on the score sheet. The reality is the Bruins need them to, or at least be on par with them or close to it, not get severely outscored if they want a chance in this series. Can they? I don't know, but the Bruins need that out of them because of the way their roster is this year.
Yeah, and by the way, like, I don't think we can entirely let DeBrusk off the hook either, because all 5 of those points came in the first 3 games, 0 in the last 4. So, but yeah, on Coyle and Zacha, like, you're right. It's like clearly neither one's a true number 1 center, which is fine. Like, you've known that all year, but they can't be putting up point totals like a 4th line center. Like, they both have to at least be 2nd line centers or 3rd liners at worst. And that production just hasn't been there. And like, Coyle's done some other things well. He had a lot of tough matchups in this series. Even Zacha, he saw Tavares a lot, but like, I don't know, okay, Zacha versus Tavares at this point in the career is like, should win that matchup a few games. Zacha, now's a good time to mention Sam Bennett is out for at least game 1. He got injured in that Tampa series, took a shot off the hand, similar to what's kept Andrew Peeke out, at least looking at it visually. So he's out at least game 1, and I guess they're reevaluating from there. But, whether it's Bennett or Anton Lundell's the guy who's moved up with Bennett out, like, Zacha or Coyle should be able to win some head-to-head matchups with those guys. Like that, Sam Bennett, I like the way he plays, but he's not like a dominant, elite center. He's a good hard player, but Coyle and Zacha should be able to go toe to toe. Yeah, Barkov's a tough one. You don't have a Barkov, so you're gonna have to figure out other ways to win that matchup. But they definitely need to be better, no question.
What are some other things they need to be better at in order to beat Florida?
Well, I think they're going to be. You have to not allow Florida to clog the neutral zone like the Leafs did in the latter half of that series in round 1. So how do you get through neutral zone traps or tough playoff neutral zone positioning? You have to take the ice that's given to you as defensemen, right? And you have to be willing to, again, if you're taking a tough hit, you got to take a tough hit. But if you see ice in front of you, Charlie McAvoy, Mason Lohrei, Hampus Lindholm, you have to take that ice and, gain the red line or have somebody finally come at you and find the open man. But by just chucking the puck into neutral zone coverage, they'll be playing on their heels all series. And I just think a cleaner transition game is essentially what I want to see. It's not going to be easy, and you're going to have to take your licks. I think they're going to have to try to match Florida's physicality as well. This is a series why they got Pat Maroon, right? The inevitable Florida matchup, and like Jacob Loco. Scott mentions Johnny Beecher being a faceoff guy. He hasn't been a savior by any means. So is Loco a guy that you can put on a fourth line and get under Florida's skin just by playing hard? Maybe, right? So, but ultimately, I would say the transition game has to be there. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I'll tie something back to last year, but the breakouts is like an obvious one. Is standing up to Florida's forecheck and figuring out how to get the puck out. It doesn't have to be cleanly in the sense of like clean passes, but flip it out. Just don't turn it over. Don't throw passes up the boards when there's traffic and it's not going to connect cleanly. Like, be willing to just flip it out if you have to. That's how Florida plays. Like, it's how Toronto started to play as that series went on. And Razor's right that like the way Toronto's playing, I don't think they do it as well as Florida, but the style helps you get ready because Florida, I forget if it might have been Nesson or maybe ESPN. One of the broadcasts had the stat that in the first round, the Panthers dumped it in on the forecheck the most of any team in the playoffs. Number 2 was the Maple Leafs. So you face a style like Florida's going to do the same thing. They're going to dump it in and go chase it and hammer you on the forecheck. That's what Toronto did. Those, by the way, the 2 series in the Atlantic Division were like by far the 2 most physical series. Like whether you look at it numbers wise or if you just watched, 4 of the top 5 teams in hits per game in the first round were Florida, Tampa, Boston, Toronto. The only other one mixed in there was the LA Kings, who, were chasing the Oilers and hitting because it was the only thing they could try to do. But yeah, like you've been battle tested. I know people think the Leafs were soft or whatever, but like that was a physical team in a physical series. So it's going to ramp up a notch. Florida's the most physical team, but it shouldn't look totally new to you.
I don't even think Toronto's soft. Mitch Marner is a player that doesn't make many body checks, but I actually think Toronto's defense played really, really strong in the back half of that series. Edmondson, Simone Benoit, Ilya Lyubushkin, Jake McCabe, like those guys played hard. They played tough. They did not give Boston's forwards a lot of space. I think that actually, to your point, Scott, it bodes well because the Bruins forwards should be used to that when they play Florida.
Well, and the Bruins defense, if you look at the way that like Nyes, Bertuzzi, Domi, Dewar, Reeves when he can get in there. Like you look at the way some of those guys forecheck, it's like Bruins defensemen should be used to it to an extent. Again, it's going to ramp up a notch because Florida's just better at it, and they're more they have more guys who do it. But it shouldn't be a totally foreign concept.
No, I think that Domi and Bertuzzi are both interesting comps to Tkachuk because they both have a little bit of him in them, and you just face 2 of them on the same line on Toronto's first line.
Definitely, they're all kind of cut from the same cloth. Obviously, Tkachuk is elite at that. I mean, the biggest difference for me between Toronto and Florida is that Toronto's best players, and I'll tip my hat to Austin Matthews. I thought he was clearly dealing with 1 or 2 or multiple things, and I thought didn't think it was a lack of effort or game being a gamer from him as to why they lost. And I think, but like Nylander and Marner, Toronto's top forwards, Toronto's top forwards, they do not play a physical style of hockey. Florida's top forwards do. Like Verhaeghe will get in there. Reinhart will get in there. We all know about Tkachuk. Barkov gets in there. Like Sam Bennett. Florida's best forwards are very physical in addition to being skilled. And it's the same with their back end, Ekblad and Montour and others.
I was underwhelmed with Marner's effort. And
so was everyone in Toronto.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I'm not someone that I don't follow a lot of the Toronto fans and media and that kind of thing throughout the regular season. And I don't even think I've been tainted by it throughout the postseason. I just noticed no back checking, no forechecking. He has the puck. He's dangerous with the puck. He's not going to try to get it back. I don't know. I was underwhelmed with him. I don't think Florida has a single guy on their team that you could comp to. This is a player we rely on to score, but he's not going to do any of the other stuff. Like, that's not what Florida doesn't have people like that.
Well, the one guy that comes to mind, I guess, would be Tarasenko, who generally has been, an offense-only guy in his career. And yet, when the Bruins played Florida twice in March, I think both were after that trade, if I'm remembering correctly. At least one of them was. But Tarasenko came in, and all of a sudden he's hitting guys on the forecheck. And it's like that. Wait, was that Vladimir Tarasenko? What the hell?
Yeah, well, he's assimilating to the new culture.
Yeah,
there is not one passenger on that Florida Panthers team. I love the way they play. They never take. Look, over the course of 82, Scott would mention in recent months, if we talked about Florida, he would say, yeah, they have their off nights too. But I guess what I mean is, when the chips are down, when it matters most, you won't really find Florida coasting at any point. Like, if you're going to beat them, it's not going to be because they're not back checking or they're not finishing their checks. It's going to be because you have to out execute them. And unfortunately for the Bruins, Florida's got a ton of skill. So in addition to their work ethic, so it's going to be a really difficult series for the Bruins. And one thing I think that won't help Boston is that if they try to pull the whole don't give in to Florida's shenanigans, just look the other way, you have to be disciplined, but you have to bring the game to them just as much as they are to you. No player likes being hit. So play physical on Tkachuk, back check these guys, play, just, meet them halfway. You're not going to beat the Florida Panthers by skating away. They're going to do what they want to do.
Right. And if you give it back to them and you start getting under their skin, the Panthers will take some stupid penalties. That's in them.
And that's what they did well in when they got up 3-1. They were doing that. And
they did it this season. If you want to learn lessons from this season, and I think we all agree, sweeping at 4-0 ultimately doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot going into the series. But there were some lessons there. The last time they played, and this is where I think, Andrew Peeke potentially coming back. And by the way, Don Sweeney said on Sunday that they expect Peeke to be ready at some point this series. He made a difference the last time they played. Him and Wotherspoon as the third pairing saw a lot of that Verhaeghe, Bennett, Tkachuk line and did a really good job, both defensively and physically, getting into it and giving it right back. And you saw, the frustration bubble with Tkachuk, and he takes a dumb, hit from behind on Wotherspoon. So again, you can do that. Bridget, as you mentioned, Tkachuk's trying to fight Ullmark in Game 4 last year, and obviously things swung in Florida's favor, from Game 5 on after that. But yeah, I'm with you, Brian. You have to give it back. This isn't, walk away, take the high road.
No. And the Ullmark, the Tkachuk Ullmark thing felt like at that point in time, obviously we know how it ends. it felt like the Bruins had the right response to all of Tkachuk's antics, or at least majority of the antics that were going on in that series with the way they were handling it. And even that Allmark thing, it felt like leaving that game, and that was the only other time Swayman played was for like less than 5 minutes or whatever when Allmark left that game. It felt like everybody on the Bruins was beating Florida at that game until crunch time came around and the last 3 games of the series happened. And then it was Florida continuing to do it because they can sustain it. Boston didn't sustain it the same way they did.
So, guys, before prediction time, I want to throw one last question at you. Okay, because then we'll break down the series in detail as we go along here, as it gets underway tonight, actually, as people listen. So we've talked about how the Panthers are the heavy favorite. We've talked about how on paper they are the superior roster. There's really no debating it, no matter what team you cheer for. Okay. So aside from Florida maybe getting off to a rusty start, what could the Bruins hang their hat on? Anything can happen in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Lesser rosters have won Stanley Cups. Lesser rosters have gone to the finals. Could a hot goalie be the story again? Is that the one area where the Bruins have the clear edge? Well, I shouldn't say clear edge because they have Bobrovsky, but the Jeremy Swayman story right now, he's clearly the hottest goalie going in the playoffs. Is that something where the Bruins should play their ace right away, or should they get back to Swayman and Allmark each get a game in the first 2 down in Florida and then see what happens afterwards? Or do you just keep going with the hottest goalie in the playoffs going up against, on paper and on the ice, probably a superior opponent?
I'm going Swayman game 1. I'm riding him until he gives me a reason not to. Now, you're going to have to monitor, wear, tear, fatigue, whatever, because he's started 5 games in a row. If he starts game 6, if he starts game 1, it'll be his 6th start in a row. It will be the first time in Jeremy Swayman's NHL career that he has started 6 games in a row. Not saying he can't do it. He's young, he's fit. Like, it's doable. We're not talking about 30 starts in a row, but you've got to monitor it. So, you got to be aware of like those first signs where, he looked a little bit slow getting across there. That rebound was a little leaky. Didn't really control it. Like, whatever it might look like, be aware of it. But, listen, I'm not Razor. I'm not goalie Bob. I haven't seen it yet. There's no sign of it.
You're not
in
Fourier,
game 7,
the goalie savant.
That's right. I'm not Christian Fourier. So I would keep riding Swayman. He'd be my game 1 goalie.
Yeah, same. And here's the thing, like, Swayman's not going to tell you he's feeling fatigued at all because he's feeling great. Like, even if physically he might be in pain, mentally, you're not going to get, like, he's not, like, he feels great mentally. So that can override, like, the adrenaline and whatever it is, like, can override that. And the competitor in him isn't going to tell you, hey, I think I need rest. Like that, I don't think that he's going to tell you that it's time.
He even said it after one of the Toronto games. He doesn't want rest. Now, I will say, first of all, I'm going Swayman, but I think the whole narrative about Swayman and Allmark, they're just not used to playing X amount of games. I understand it. I think it's been blown a little bit out of proportion. I think like goalies have played a lot of games in their careers, like whether it's in the minors. I know it's not the NHL and it's not the grind of the NHL playoffs, but like they can play the game if they need to. Like, it's not, and more importantly, he's not showing any signs that he is slowing down. He looks like he's getting more and more and more into it every single game. And it's almost like you think he can't play any better in the next game he does. And I just think when you have a team in Florida that really have no excuse losing this series, you see it all the time. Goalies can get into opposition's heads And Jeremy Swayman, not that Allmark wouldn't like this or Tuukka Rask wouldn't like this or whatever, but if Matthew Tkachuk skates by the Bruins net and like love taps Swayman on the pads, just like, Domi hit Swayman in Toronto and Swayman loves it. He loves it. There was a scrum earlier this year. He was trying to fight the goalie down the other end. He has that. What's the phrase the kids use these days? He has that dog in him. So I like him. I like the Bruins goalie having that gamer in him and loving those moments against a team like Florida. I think it's a perfect matchup. And to Scott, to your point, until he gives you a reason not to, I'm going with Swayman.
There's a goalie bucket list, by the way, and that includes goalie goal, goalie fight. And he's already got the assist, so he doesn't have to worry about that. He's got a game 7. He needs a Stanley Cup, but it's all on the goalie bucket list. And goalie fight, he's looking for one of those. I don't know if it's going to happen in the playoffs, but my last question for you guys is...
hold on. I had one more thing there.
About
Brian,
Swayman?
Yeah, Brian, you're right that like Swayman should be able to handle it. I'm just saying, just be on the lookout. Like, just because Bridget, you're right too. Like, Swayman's not going to say it himself.
No.
So I'm saying like goalie Bob, Monty, whoever, if Sweeney needs to be involved, like just have your eyes open, because last year you ignored the signs when it looked pretty obvious to all of us that Linus Ullmark was getting worn down. Mm-hmm. And whether it's injury related or not, it's like they can sit there and say he got cleared every game and he said he felt fine and all that, but it's like, I don't like, listen, again, I'm not an expert, but like I can see that he looks slower moving around. Like that seemed pretty obvious to me, and it felt like people who should know better ignored it. So I'm just saying, don't ignore it if we start to see that with Swayman.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Yep. Any sign of, significant injury or he's not himself. Yeah. You have a great goaltender on the bench. Like don't hesitate. But if everything is looking great, I wouldn't do anything necessarily.
My last question for you guys is, now that the Bruins are in this series with Florida, rematch from last year, and the Bruins are the lower seed, they're the underdogs, the pressure for getting out of the first round is gone. Do you think that plays into the Bruins' mentality? Like, does that give them a little bit of a mental boost? Whereas last year it was their series to lose. Now they feel the opposite way. The pressure doesn't feel like it's 100, like it's not weighing 100 pounds on their back right now. To me, I think there's a difference between coming in, first of all, it being the second round, being the lower seed. Do you guys think that helps in any way? Obviously, we talked about the rosters and all of those merits of everything, but in terms of a mental game, does that to me, it makes this series feel different than last year's series? Do you think that helps?
I mean, I absolutely do. I think I remember Scott saying last year, and we all felt the same way. The most frustrating part about what happened last year was that they had a ton of pressure going into that series against Florida. They had the greatest record in the history of the league, most points. The only thing you can't do is lose in the first round. So there was a ton of pressure to get through that first round, and they were 50 seconds away from winning game 7. Florida had the goalie pulled. You get through that first round, you take a huge sigh of relief. Whew. Okay, all right, boys. We will not be the team to have the greatest record and the highest points in NHL history and lose in the first round. We dodged that bullet. Let's take a breath and let's play some hockey now, boys, right? They couldn't do that. And then had they done that, they probably would have gone on a run to at least the finals, right? I mean, or the conference finals, because they probably would have beaten Toronto. Like no reason to think they wouldn't have, right? And then maybe you play the Golden Knights and Bruce Cassidy gets his ultimate revenge. But aside from that, this year you had that same pressure again, especially when you went up 3-1 because of what happened last year. So now it's not the pressure of being the highest point total team and the best record in league history losing in the first round pressure. Now it's we can't be the first team in North American pro sports to lose back-to-back years up 3-1. This year, they finally are able to exhale. They got the goal in overtime. Now they can play a little bit more free. Now players that may not have thought they had a great first-round series, Charlie McAvoy, Pavel Zacha, Charlie Coyle, you name it. Now they get a fresh, clean slate. Go down to Florida, get some UV rays, be the underdog, and let Florida take the pressure and just be the underdog with motivation to get retribution.
Yeah, and if we think, like, as I believe we all do, that this Bruins team has not handled pressure very well at times in the playoffs, then yeah, having less of it on you should be a good thing. It should allow you to play a little more free. So clearly they don't have, now that they've gotten out of the first round, now that they are the underdogs, there's always pressure in the playoffs, obviously, but not as much as there was last year. Not as much as there was up 3-1 and then letting that slip away to a game 7 this year against Toronto. So should help, you would think. Underdog mentality is a strong thing. Like, you see a lot of teams that are able to embrace that and use it to their advantage. So
you see a lot of teams or a lot of coaches trying to convince their teams they're the underdog, even when they're not, like, not even close. Yeah. And actually, I saw some controversy with like the Rangers in Carolina. Like, there's been a whole, because these fan bases, they haven't watched hockey in a little bit. I mean, Rangers are playing Sunday when we're recording this, but there was a whole argument. Who's the underdog? Rangers, Carolina. It's because everybody wants to. Coaches, there's a reason why coaches try to convince their team that they're the underdog. And in this case, it's really, there's not much of an argument. The Bruins are an underdog in this series. I know I said that was my last question, but do you think that the Bruins should stay in a hotel for home games now, after what we know about how they played in game 7 and knowing the record previously at home was not good? And it's, and Montgomery said this. I don't know if that's why we came in with a fresher attitude and the outside noise didn't reach us. But to be honest with you, it might even just be a superstition thing. I'm going hotel.
Yeah, I think they should never go home again. I think they should live as nomads, hunting and gathering food.
Just like foraging for blueberries somewhere, like I don't know. They're fishing in Florida. They're just like spear fishing somewhere between games to get their food. I don't know.
I don't know if that'll be necessary, but the one last thing I'll say too about getting to the second round, there's less to hang your head about. If you go down in the second round of the NHL playoffs when there's 4, 5, 6 teams that are home, it's you're down to 8 teams. All 16 teams that make the playoffs are good teams. You get down to the final 8, it's like you lose to a good team. It is what it is. Obviously, we can think of Bruins second round exits that were kind of shameful, like the Carolina series in 2009 and Philly in 10, and but for the most part, if you lose in the second round, it's like you can bear that, right? It's when you have the first round exit, when you have all this expectations, that it can be problematic bowing out early. So
one last point I'll make, since we talked about Bruins goaltending quite a bit, Sergei Bobrovsky, for as good of a career as he's had, 2 Vezina trophies, Vezina finalists this year, he can be prone to like pretty wild swings in his consistency, including in the playoffs. And this year, just noting this, he started 58 games this year, the most he started in 5 years. His final 10 starts of the season, his save percentage dipped to .900. Then in the first round against Tampa, it was .898. So that's now 15 games where he has been a below average goalie in terms of save percentage. Just pointing it out, just noting it. Like, it's not a given that you're going to face Vezina Trophy Bobrovsky. He might pop up. He certainly showed up in the second and third rounds last year against Toronto and Carolina, and then fell apart in the Stanley Cup final against Vegas. But you like, that would be one thing that would be a huge plus for the Bruins, is if you get bad Bob in this series. Now, Florida does have a good backup in Stolarz, so even if you run Bobrovsky, doesn't guarantee like goaltending's a pushover. But I'm really interested to see how. But I'm always interested to see how Bobrovsky plays. Like I find him fascinating just because of that contract and how inconsistent he's been since he got to Florida. But he's had a mostly very good season this year with a little bit of a slowdown towards the end.
If you get one of the Bobbery saves, if you know what I'm talking about, that they decided to make t-shirts off right after he did it, the Bobbery. Great save. It's one save though. Like you might get one of those per game, but you also might get one of those goals where Frederick beats Samson off in the first round that like half a percentage of goal, like 0.5% chance of going in. Like that's the swing that you're looking at. And Jack Edwards in March when they last played said that Bobrovsky's going through his regular like March horrible swing or whatever. It's just alluding to the fact that you can be up and down.
So, and Spencer Knight's not a bad goalie to have in a 3-hole either. I think he's down in the minors right now, but highly touted prospect. He's had some experience, but for the third guy, not bad. Okay, Bridget, Scott, let's get down to it. What are your predictions for the Bruins-Panthers second round series? Bridget, do you have a prediction you want to start with, or do I want to go to Scott first?
I've convinced myself now this is going to 7 again.
Okay.
So I'll just start with that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm conflicted because I feel like Florida should be the team that wins the series. And if it's a short series, it's going to Florida. There's no way the Bruins are winning in 4. Like, I don't see Bruins in 4 or 5. Like, if it's a short series, it's Florida series. So I'm going to pick, I hate doing this. I'm going to pick Florida in 7. I don't want to. Like, part of me is really Boston has it this time. Like, there's so much behind them, but at the same time, watching Florida and how dominant they were against that Tampa series, I don't want to take anything away from what they are, what they've been so far this playoffs. They're hoping the rest helps. Bruins are hoping it's rust. The classic. What's the lesser of two evils? You never know. So if it goes to 7, though, which I think it could, and I think it will. I'm predicting that, even though I'm not a psychic, like I always tell Scott. I don't like predicting stuff.
I think we should
anyone
just make
can win
Bridget
a game
predict
7.
That. Bridget is like so tortured every time she has to make a prediction. We should make Bridget predict different things every episode.
Guys, there's only a few things that I'll tell you when I'm ready to predict them. And one of them was the day that Scott and I got stuck in that elevator. I predicted that. I've predicted, like when I'm feeling confident about something, I'll let you know. But playoff hockey, do you really feel that confident about your, like, who am I to think I can predict the future? I'm also a hockey fan that just wants to enjoy a series. So I'm not like, I feel like people get mad at you when you're like, go contradict yourself on something that you predicted at the beginning of a series when you haven't even seen game 1 yet. So I think I think predictions are kind of stupid. Not a gambler. I've never gambled on anything in my life. So, to me, predictions are like going through the motions. Sorry, that's my own little rant about why you see me get so uncomfortable.
I was gonna say, I know, like we hear it every time.
I'm sorry. Well, so what was your pick? Panthers in 7?
If you make me, yeah.
Okay.
Well, Brian, I don't know
recapping.
about you, but we're 1 for 1. I feel pretty confident in my predictions.
I know.
Do you feel confident about the goalie rotation, Scott?
I feel great about it. All right, Bruins if the Bruins had continued the rotation, they would have already won the cup. So
it's June already by now. If they,
anyways, hate to say it, Panthers in 6.
Damn it. You guys are putting me in quite the predicament here.
Because you're going to pick the Panthers, right? But now you don't want to.
Well, you know what? I'll go Bruins in 7. I'll be the optimist.
Well,
do I think the Bruins are going to win? I'm not too confident because I can easily see Florida in 5. But listen, if the Bruins find a way to win this series, I'll look like a genius or somebody who is just dumb luck.
Just pulled it out of your ass like everyone else who makes predictions.
I will say here's the thing. The Bruins are definitely not as good as Florida. There's no doubt about it. I don't think the Bruins are this David versus Goliath type underdog. I mean, they're a good team, and they have a really hot goalie that's playing some of the best hockey of his career. And so I am cautiously going to go Boston in 7 just to not have an all Florida panel. How's that sound?
Well, okay.
I believe my pick. I believe my pick.
Can I clarify? Do you? Okay.
Yeah.
Can I clarify mine? The fact that I picked
what
7.
What was the last 8 minutes? What was that? That wasn't
No,
clarified?
I'm about to like undo what I did. No. So if it goes 7.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you after game 1.
Shut up. Someone mute his mic. I can kick you right now if I want to.
Good. I'm tired. I want to go to bed.
If it goes 7, everybody knows it's anyone's game in game 7. So
if it goes 7, the Bruins are winning in overtime on the road and reversing the curse from last year. So that'll do it for us.
No.
Enjoy game. Oh.
No.
Scott's
I had one last thing to say.
Okay.
I'm also just as tired as Scott, so
No,
I don't
you're
feel.
not.
Yes, I am. Excuse me. We both did the same thing the last
You
year.
definitely got more sleep than me last night.
Excuse you. I worked 2 games yesterday. So let's
I went
cut
to morning
that.
skate.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had one more thing to say, and it has to do with somebody that you like, Kevin Shattenkirk, because he's a BU guy just like yourself. They said Shattenkirk gave him a good speech before game 7, right? Maroon spoke today. He said what Shattenkirk told them was you have to have no regrets when you lay your head down. And that's what the Bruins have to do. They have to leave it all out there in the series against Florida. No regrets. Guys like Charlie McAvoy, other players who haven't had their best series need to just think about that, think about those words, and go out there and play their best hockey.
And that's why the Bruins are going to win in 7.
I have no regrets about this podcast, and now I'm going to lay my head down.
Okay. All right. Great.
All right.
Let us know how you feel.
Well, thank you all for listening. Enjoy game 1. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday. Hey, guys. Thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.